Today we'll be going through forgiveness with the story of Joseph. So I think forgiveness is a really big theme for Joseph. He had a lot of betrayal put against him. So does anyone want to recap the story of Joseph for me? Mhm. That's right. Perfect. So that's exactly right. He worked his way up, and I think when you go through the story of Joseph, you see, like when you read it, it always says, "And the Lord was with Joseph." No matter what happened to him, God was always there. And I think for us as well, it's important to remember that when we go through trials and tribulations, that the Lord was with Carol, the Lord was with Emily. I think when you read it on paper, it's hard to imagine the things that happened, but yeah, he was obviously a good guy. I think so. I think practically, Joseph always forgave because he had Christ in his heart always. That was his main focus. And I think if he really focused on what his brothers did to him, I don't think he would get to where he got to in life. So I think that's important. And in Genesis 45, verse 5, it says, "But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you have sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." So there was a really big plan in place for him. And without that forgiveness, that plan wouldn't happen, I think, at all. And I think in today's world, we always get told an eye for an eye, like always treat others how they treat you. But in Joseph's case, he completely disregarded that. He treated people the opposite of what he treated him. Like his whole family, most of his family, turned against him. So yeah, that's it. Thanks, guys.
Speaker's just going to be here in about 2 to 7 minutes. So while 2 to 7, just somewhere in between there. If I'm wrong, then I'll happily take some criticism. But if it's within 2 to 7, then don't throw hands. So just until he gets here, we'll do a quick hymn. I'm just trying to blab on until I get the screen ready because it's not loading. How does Moses make his tea? He brews it. Let him. Alrighty. Very early Sunday morning, while the gods were still asleep, arose declaring his promise he did keep. Our Lord arose declaring his promise he did keep. Resurrection is my song. Resurrection gave me life. Resurrection made me strong. Jesus, my Lord, is alive. Resurrection made me strong. Jesus, my Lord, is alive. Jesus is risen in glory. Heaven and earth sang and praised, and the angel told the story. He is risen as he said, and the angel told the story. He is risen as he said. Resurrection is my song. Resurrection gave me life. Resurrection made me strong. Jesus, my Lord, is alive. Resurrection made me strong. Jesus, my Lord, is alive. Guys, 2 minutes later, as I said. So once again, welcome back to another Monday night Bible study. Today we have a slight, I think the message did have the correct details, been a slight change of plans. We had our speaker bail on us last minute today. So today, thank be to God and to Mark as well. We are going to be guided through through Genesis chapter 22, and Mark will be guiding us through the chapter. It's probably one of my favorites chapters in the Bible, because one of my favorite fractions of the liturgy has been based on that chapter. So it's the story of Isaac being sacrificed. So please make Mark feel welcome as he guides us through that chapter.
Okay, so hello everybody. In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and God, Amen. So today we have the story of, we're going through Genesis chapter 22. So if possible, are we able to get it on the screen, Anthony? Okay, awesome, thank you. So with this chapter, there's a few famous, like Anthony said, it's good that he loves this chapter. So if any questions, we can go straight to him. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through this chapter. We're going to, give it a bit of a summary and go from there. So there's a few characters in this chapter, and the first one is Abraham, Isaac, and relating to them is Sarah. So what we'll do is we can ask everyone maybe to see or can tell us who they are, just so we can get a bit of context. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, awesome. Say again. Yeah, awesome. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we need to know. So those are the characters, right? So in Genesis chapter 22, it's a very famous story in the Bible. Very nice fractions come from there. And it's a story where God is testing Abraham, right? God is testing Abraham by asking him to offer up Isaac, his son. So Isaac, this promised child, is being asked by God to Abraham, the father, offer him to me. So offer this son to me. So we're going to see this in this chapter today. And the takeaway, or one of the key points to take away from this chapter, is there is a promise from God today that if I give whatever he asks of me, he will multiply and bless me more and more. So that's the promise from God today. So if we give what he asks, he'll multiply. And so a key thing, or the caption that we can take, is the capacity they are able to lose everything. So to the capacity that you're able to lose everything is the capacity you're able to gain everything. So whatever you give, you'll get back. Okay? And so what we read today has to mean something to us. So it's not just a historical event where Abraham, did this, Isaac did this. It's not just history, but it's also the promise that we need to see, and that we need to flee to God and give everything up for him and run to him. And if we do so, we'll have strong consolation and blessings will follow. Okay, and the blessings are not because of anything that we did, but because of the purity that is within. And we'll go through that today. Does anyone have any questions so far? Any comments? Anyone want to add anything? Okay, so since we have it up on the screen, what we'll do is, if we can please read verse 1 and 2. Does anyone have a microphone? Awesome, thank you.
Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your beloved son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a whole burnt offering on one of the mountains I tell you.
Awesome. So what we see here is God starts to speak to Abraham, right? So in this verse 1, what we see is God tested, and now it came to pass, God tested Abraham, right? So it's a test. And he said to him, Abraham. Okay, and Abraham's response is, here I am. So what we can see here is Abraham is always ready to respond to God. So God just said Abraham, and his response was immediate, just like that. So Abraham is someone who recognizes God's voice. He knows his voice, he can hear it, and he can respond immediately. So there's no hesitation. So what we do is we can take this as a lesson for us. How often is God trying to speak to us? And how often do we not respond to his voice because we can't hear it? You know, how often do we pray about something and say, God doesn't answer my prayers? How often do we say, there's no one there, I speak, there's no response, there's no answer to my prayer? Is that actually the case? Or do we just not know God's voice? Is it the case, or do we not have a relationship with God that we don't know that if he says, Mark, am I saying, here I am? If he says, whoever your name is, are you responding? Right? So just like Samuel, he didn't respond instantly. He didn't know the voice of God, right? And eventually he responded, and what did God do? He spoke to him straight away. So it's a lesson for us, that maybe God's trying to speak to us in every moment of every day, but we're just not listening. So what we can see here is that Abraham, in every moment of his life, and we'll see this happening many times in this chapter, is that he's listening to the voice of God, right? He's always there listening to it. So I'll give you guys a quick story. So one of my friends, he's in interstate. Speak to him, like we were very close in school, and as you went to interstate, obviously we drifted a little bit. And so then recently he called me on private, and I didn't know who it was, so I usually don't answer, but I answered. I don't know why. I answered. I said, hello. And he starts speaking to me normally, because he doesn't know his number's on private. And just from the way he's speaking, I was able to tell who this was. I was like, oh, hey, bro, how are you? Good, good. I was like, your number's on private. He's like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize, whatever. Anyways, continued. I guess the point of the story is the more he spoke, the more I recognized his voice. But it should be similar with God, If we have a true relationship with him, if we have that true friendship with him, when he speaks, we'll hear him, and he doesn't have to say who he is. You don't have to say, who are you? You can just say, oh, yeah, God, this is you. It's like the resurrection, right? When Jesus went to Mary and she turned around and he said her name, all she said was Rabbi straight away. He just said Mary, So she knows who he is. They know him. So let us build that relationship with God, and let us build it through prayer. Let's develop that relationship through prayer, and that way we can develop this relationship and we can hear God's voice. So when he speaks, we'll hear him and do what he wants us to do. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that? What do you mean? Yeah, of course. And so that's similar. Adam and Eve, they didn't listen. They were put through a test. They didn't listen. And Abraham's put through a test, but he listened. So we'll see that comparison as well to him. So through verse 2, we can see God puts a tough test on Abraham, right? So as you can see, God makes it very clear, right, in that verse. He says, the only son you have. So not just your son, but the only son, the one you waited for. This is the one that you love. You can see it in that verse. And God says, this is the one I want you to offer to me. So God doesn't just say, yes, give me one of your 10 sons, or give me one of your 50 sons. He says, give me this one son, the one you waited for, the one that's a promise. And so Abraham here has a very difficult choice to make. Everything he was waited for, everything God promised to him is all summed up into Isaac. So without Isaac, that whole promise falls apart, right? There's nothing there. So this is, Isaac was Abraham's fulfillment in that promise. So at this point, it's very easy for Abraham to say, no, I don't want to. Like you said, I don't want to give up my son. I don't want to do it. And who would blame him? This is the guy he's waited for so long. It's a miracle. His wife gave birth at a very old age. It's a request that to the world doesn't make sense, right? So it doesn't make sense to us. But God tells Abraham to go to the land of Moriah, which you can see there. And he says, offer Isaac there. So, like we said, humanity was tested in the Garden of Eden, and now it's being tested again through Abraham. Okay, so with this land of Moriah, a lot of us will have this moment in our life, this land of Moriah moment in our life. And it's the place where God tells Abraham to go and sacrifice his son. But we'll have one similar. So we may be called to behave in a certain way. We may be called to go against everything we feel, everything we want, and it may feel completely nonsensical, right? But at the end of the day, this is what's happening here with Abraham. So sometimes we're called, to thank God in significant suffering, and this makes no sense. It may be very difficult, but that's our land of Moriah moment, right? So, for example, if you look at Pope Carlos, when he didn't respond to people when they'd come to ask him for prayers and things like that, to them it was completely nonsense. Like, I traveled this whole way to speak to you and you're not even speaking to me, right? It doesn't make sense. But the answer is just have faith. So the same thing can happen with our confession fathers. They might tell us, you want to do this, but this is the actual answer you should do. And you say, what are you talking about? That makes absolutely no sense. I don't want to do this. And I say, no, this is what you do, right? Sometimes that's the end of Moriah moment where everything makes no sense. It's time to be obedient and to listen and see what happens when we are obedient, right? So, also, God sometimes can ask us to give something up that's very incredibly dear to our hearts, right? Or dear to ourselves. So a sin, a lifestyle, a hope for something in our life. So not just something we have, but something we're striving for. So if we're striving for something, God might say, no, I don't want you to do this. And maybe we need to give that up. And maybe we think that that's what's going to make us happy, but God doesn't want us to have it. So once again, that could be the land of Moriah moment, right? So at this point of the test for Abraham, similarly, in Adam and Eve, this is where they failed. This is the part of the test they failed, right? But Abraham doesn't. So let's keep reading. If someone else can read verse 3 to 6.
So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 servants with him and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the 2 of them went together.
Okay, so what we can see here, firstly, in verse 3, does anyone know why he got up early in the morning? Does anyone have any other ideas? Yeah? Yeah, so it doesn't change his mind. Anything else anyone can think of? Yeah, awesome. So, personally, I didn't find any serious answer to it, so I think everything is valid, right? The only other thing I also thought of was maybe he was eager to follow God's command. So maybe he wanted to implement exactly what God said straight away. He didn't want to hesitate. If God told me to do this, I'm going to do it. So maybe, I don't know, I don't know the answer. But yeah, all these things, all add up and make sense. So Abraham here doesn't know the outcome of the story. God asked him to do something. And so Abraham went up with the mindset of, God asked me to do this, so I'm going to do it. And if he doesn't want me to do it, he'll stop me from doing it. So it's not in his power. He's submitting his will to God and saying, whatever you will, I'll do. Okay? So the inspirational thing here about Abraham is that he knows Isaac is the gift from God. Okay? So he knows Isaac was given as a gift. So, like we said, he was given in his old age. His wife Sarah was advanced in years. She was pretty old. And it was absolutely nonsense or didn't make sense, right, for him to receive this gift from God at that time. But it came to him as a gift. And it's a free gift, and this is the concept he understands. And I think this is something that we should also understand in our lives because it'll help us, right? So, for example, because Abraham understands this concept, that God has given me something, he has every right to take it back no matter what he asks for. So, if God has given me this jumper, if he asks for it back, am I going to say no? How can I say no, right? If Carol gave me this laptop, and if she wants it back, can I say no? No, she gave it to me. It was hers, she gave it to me, right? So, if God gives us something good, do you guys think he has the right to ask for it back or no? Yeah? Hands up for no. Hands up for yes. Right? So majority says yes, okay? So does anyone think, okay, next, oh, actually, let's, yeah, what do you mean? Mm. Yeah, so in this case, he doesn't do it, right? It was more of a test, right? But I guess the concept is more of if he wanted to, like if he asked from it, do we have the right to say no? So, for example, in this case where Abraham was asked for Isaac, does he have the right to say, no, I don't want to give him back to you? Or would he say, in that case, like at this point, not knowing the future of the story, does he have the right to say, or what do you think is the appropriate response? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Mm. Yeah, and that's also because Abraham knew God's character. So like Chris was saying, God never, like even in the future in the Old Testament, you see God rebukes people who offer their children up for sacrifices, right? So Abraham knows this isn't a request that a loving father would request, right? So he knows this. But at the end of the day, if he told me to do this, I'm going to do it. If he tells me to stop, I'll stop. Like he's just following what is told to him, even though for him at this point it makes no sense. But given that he knows the Father, he knows his characteristics, he knows how he's acting, he doesn't think this is, something from God or something in his character to do, but he told me to do it, so therefore I'm just going to follow. You know what I mean? Yeah? Yeah, like he won't force himself onto you. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I guess, like to summarize this kind of concept, the more of what I'm trying to say or ask is, if God requested something from us that is ours, would we give it back happily, or would we hold on to it and say, "This is mine. I earned it myself." So the giver of all good gifts is God, and Abraham understood this concept, right? And the good gift for him was Isaac. So if he requested Isaac, what he says is, "Yes, I will follow, and I will give you Isaac as your request," right? So in our lives, there's nothing that is ours that we earned on our own. Nothing that we have that we worked for. So sometimes, actually, let's ask a question. Does anyone think there's anything that they have earned on their own that is theirs? Or something that they feel like, I worked for this, I got it? Okay, because the answer, or my answer is, no matter what you say, everything we have is a gift. So if I say I worked, so I earned my money, who gave you health to work? Who gave you the brain to work? Who gave you the ability to work? It's nothing that I could have done. If I look at someone who's got an illness, what's the difference between me and this person? Was it anything I did? Right? So I was blessed with what I have. It was God who gave me all these things. So nothing makes me different from the person next to me of my ability. Does that make sense? So no matter what it is, God's given it to us. And so, therefore, if He requests it, He asks for it, we should, have the ability like Abraham to say yes. So, okay. So if we look in verse 6, right? So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the two of them went together, right? So in this verse, Isaac here is an image of Christ, okay? The son of the promise is Christ, just as Isaac was the son of the promise. The only begotten son is Christ, just as Isaac was the only son of Abraham. Isaac in humility took the wood on him, right, when he was about to get slain, just as Christ carried the cross to the slaughter. So what we can see in this verse is Isaac represents Christ. So can the next person read verse 7 to 10, please?
Spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." Then he said, "Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering." So the two of them went together. Then they came to the place which God had told them. And Abraham built an altar there and placed wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son.
Okay, so what we could see here is Abraham is building an altar to the Lord. And so in the Old Testament, whenever you see there's an altar, so it's basically a meeting place with God. So that's what it means. So Abraham brings his sacrifice to the altar and is ready to meet God face to face. And Abraham knew at this moment it's probably the most difficult trial or the most difficult thing he's going to do. And he understands that in those most difficult times, that's where you see Christ. That's where we're going to meet Christ. So in the times where we feel like this is a very difficult moment in our lives, you typically find Christ in those moments, right? And so as you can see in verse 8, Abraham, right, maybe we'll read it again. He said, "My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering." Okay, so even in the final moments, right, when it's getting towards the end of it, what does Abraham say? I have confidence and trust in God that no matter what the outcome is, He's going to provide. No matter what is going to happen here, God is there and He's going to provide because he understands who God is, right? He knows God's character and he understands that no matter what's going to happen, he knows God, right? And this shows us the depth of Abraham's relationship with God, that no matter what was happening, his faith is unwavering. So no matter what is going on in his life, his faith is solid, okay? So there's nothing that's going to stop him. So can someone read verse 10 again for us, please? Yeah. Okay. We will speak about that actually, and we'll actually go into it, but if I don't answer it, let me know. Okay? Yeah? Yeah, so this is verse 10, right? So the whole story stops here, right? So everything stops here. The altar's built, the wood is there. He's bound his son already to this altar, right? And he's got his knife in his hand ready to slay him. So everything stopped, right? So to answer your question, did Isaac know? I would say he probably did, right? Because he asked his father, where's the lamb for a burnt offering? There's no lamb. He's being bound. He's got a knife ready to kill him. So like in this case, you see Isaac doesn't fight back, and he's probably figured out something strange is about to happen, right? And as he's being bound to the altar, it becomes very clear to Isaac, right? So it's nothing that is there. And something that's very inspirational about Isaac is he can fight back, right? Isaac was young. His father was old. He didn't have to accept this to happen to him, right? So imagine the love that this son had for his father, that he just obeyed him, that he stayed there, even though he was binding him to slaughter him. He trusted his father and didn't fight back, right? So he looked at him, he said, whatever your will is, I trust you. You're a heavenly man, and if it's time for you to slaughter me, whatever your reasoning is, I trust you, right? And this is the most beautiful image of Christ, that even throughout his crucifixion, he didn't utter one word in his defense. Pilate questioned him to ask him, give me a reason to release you. And what's his response? He says, you have no power over me unless it was given to you from above. So even though Abraham could have defended himself, Christ could have defended himself in that situation, but he chose not to. He chose to stay quiet. And he absolved the people. He said, people delivered me here, right? And he absolves them. So that silence that Isaac had resembles the silence that Christ had, even to the end. It didn't stop, right? So we see that trust, faith, and love Isaac had with his father, and we know that whatever is happening, and he knew that whatever was happening was the will of God, right? So what we can see here is that relationship they had was really, really strong. And so this also gives us, the responsibility as anyone who's going to be a father or mother, that your kids, you want them to have the ability to be able to trust you the way Isaac trusted his father. That no matter what's happening, if your children see you do something, they know that you're so spiritual, that you're so faithful, that no matter what the outcome is, if it makes complete no sense to them, that whatever you say is your will. And it's God's will, and it's for good. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, and you find that God works through these people. The people that are able to submit their will without resistance, God works through them. And you see today the blessings that Abraham receives because of that ability to submit his will and not, be resistant, So, yeah. Yeah, honestly, I'm not too sure. Does anyone have an answer to that? Because I have a part answer, but I don't know exactly. Right? So if we read verse 11, Carol, can you read verse 11 for us? Right? So at this last minute, God starts to speak to Abraham. So just as it's about to happen, God says, I think so, I don't know. Does anyone know the answer to that? Yeah, I think so too. I think if nothing stopped him, he would have done it. Like if God didn't tell him, Abraham, like if he's that committed, I don't. I think it's more of like, for example, if God, we know who he is, right? We know the character he is, you understand who he is, and you understand that he's very faithful. But if you ask me to do something, I'm going to do it, but I don't know when he's going to deliver on his promise. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to keep following, but I know that the end of it, no matter the outcome is at the end, that it's going to be for good. So is it to do this or not to do this? Is it to do that or not to that? I don't know, but all I know is no matter what happens from A to Z, it's going to be for good. But like, for example, like if you guys, some of the guys said Job, Job's story, like when did he know what to do? You know what I mean? Like you just, I think Abraham in this case, this is my opinion, I think he was going to do it. And if no one told him to stop, he would have done it. And no matter what would have happened after, he would have had the understanding that if he did slay him, that was God's will, and God will deliver on his promise still. And that's that concept, only two people know where your heart is. It's yourself and God. So Abraham's true intentions, God knows and Abraham knows. And because he was true in his intentions, God blesses him a lot. And we'll see that towards the end of this chapter, that because he was true, because he understood the concept of, if God asks me for something, if he asks for it back, I'm going to give it because it's not mine. No matter what it is, I'll sacrifice no matter what it is. And because Abraham was going to do that, he became that perfect vessel that God could work through, because he had that fear of God. And we'll read that very soon. So in verse 11, right? That's all right. Makes sense. Yeah, so I agree with that, right? So, but I guess to answer that, like you said, Abraham had a very strong relationship with God, that he knew his voice. Like, for example, if you were to call me Carol and I didn't know who you were, or like you didn't give me your number, I would know who you are just from your voice. Or if I was listening to a sermon and I heard you ask a question, I would know, oh, that's Carol, you know? And so then if he knows God that deeply and God started to speak to him, he knows that that's God's voice. I think for us today, it's a bit different. You know, maybe if our relationship's not the strongest with God, you know, we need to get that, you know, like have spiritual discernment, speak to our confession father, right? But it's like Pope Carlos, for example. Whatever he did was God's will, because he was in communion with God, so that whatever he did, it was God's will as well, because him and God were basically one. Like he had that ability that whatever I'm thinking is what God is thinking, because he's that close with him. So he knew God really well, so that way, if people came to him, he already knew the answer. Not because of anything, you know, magical or whatever, but because he had that deep relationship. So same thing with Abraham, he had that deep relationship, so when he heard God's voice, he knows that that is God and it's not something else. Does that make sense? But does that mean God is asking us to kill our children? No, because you see, he won't let it happen anyways. Right? So at that last minute, God speaks to Abraham again, and once again, we see that concept that Abraham is waiting and always listening for God. So even just as he's about to do it, the heavens, so God called him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here I am. Right? So what we can see is Abraham says, I'm here and I'm ready to do whatever you want me to do. Whatever you ask me to do, I'm ready to do it. And I'm always ready to change my mind. I'm always ready to listen at any time. So in every moment in his life, he's waiting and listening to hear the word of God. So God told him and showed him every step in his life, the path and exactly what to do. So how much of our lives do we listen for God? So can we go days and days without even passing a thought, or even thinking that God is next to me, calling me, or wanting to give me something better? How many times can that happen, right? For Abraham, every time God called him, he heard him straight away. Every time God tried to speak to him, he knew him, so he was able to respond instantly. So it was more of, Abraham, can you do this now? Can you do this later? Abraham, can you do this now? Can you do this now? It was more of just like a parent to their children, guiding them to tell them what to do. So I think that's the relationship he had with him. And so the second God says, Abraham, Abraham, he says, here I am. And there is a guarantee that God is calling us every moment of every day. His voice is there calling, but do we hear it? Okay, so if we hear it or not, that's on us, but that doesn't mean God isn't speaking to us. So Abraham heard it every time. So he was always confident in whatever he did, that it was God's will. So let's look at verse 12. If someone can read verse 12 for us, please. Right, so now we can see God says to Abraham before he slays Isaac, stop. He tells him stop, right? You passed the test, good job. And he acknowledges and recognizes the difficulty of the test that he put to Abraham through, right? And how do we know that? So if we look in that verse, he goes, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God. So now he knows that because he committed so much and because he wasn't going to stop until he heard God's voice, he says, now I know that you fear me, right? And since you have not withheld your son, and he repeats, your only son from me. So God here, we can see, acknowledges that it wasn't something simple that he asked of him. It wasn't just, oh, sacrifice your son. He says, no, your son, but your only son. So I see the depth of what I asked you was very high. Like the severity of what you were going to do had an impact on your life. And you were going to do it. And he recognizes that, right? So as we see earlier in the chapter, God said, the son that you love. And now he repeats, do not withhold your son, your only son. And he says he knows that he fears him. So now I know that you fear God. And this demonstrates, like what we said earlier, to God that Abraham is the perfect vessel for God. So that Abraham is ready to work. God is ready to work through Abraham because he knows no matter what's going to happen, Abraham is ready to obey and listen at any time. The fact that he was going to kill his son, it showed God that no matter what he's going to do, he's ready to listen to me no matter what, right? And so we'll see this again in verse 16 where God speaks about your only son. And so what we can see is God doesn't forget it and he acknowledges the difficulty of what he asked Abraham. So same thing in our lives, right? So, for example, we get paid. Everyone that works gets paid, right? And God asks us, to give the tithe. It's very difficult sometimes, right, to give up the tithe. But God acknowledges that and he rewards it. Right? And that's with anything in our life. Okay? So God acknowledges everything that we give, and if it's very hard for us to give, he doesn't forget it. So if we've given something to God that we feel like this is ripping my soul out, this is very difficult, have faith, believe that he's seen it and he's going to reward it openly. Right? So does anyone have any questions or comments so far, anything they want to add or subtract? Yeah. So I don't know the exact ages, to be honest. All I know is Abraham was very old and Isaac was young but old enough to be able to have the ability to fight back and not let it happen. So yeah, for sure. That's right. Okay. Can the next person read verse 13 and 14, please?
Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mountains of the Lord it shall be provided.
Awesome. So this ram represents Christ. So just as the lamb was slain, Christ was slain in the flesh. And this raising of the lamb is Isaac, who came back alive, just as Christ returned to live. So the lamb took the place of Isaac, just as Christ takes the place of our sins. Does anyone have any comments or questions about that part? All right, awesome. So in verse 14, we see that Abraham turned the land of Moriah. I don't know if you guys remember what we said earlier, but the land of Moriah was the place where God asked Abraham to go to sacrifice and slay his son. And so what we said was the land of Moriah resembles anything in our lives that is very difficult for us to do. So anything in our life that is, God asks us to do and we find that this is impossible, I don't want to do it, but we do it. That's what the land of Moriah is, right? So Abraham, what we see, called this place, instead of the land of Moriah, is the Lord will provide. So he changed the name of this place, of a place that is meant to be difficult, to a land of where the Lord provides. So for us, I think we can also follow Abraham's footsteps here, is that whatever our land of Moriah is, be it that we sacrifice this, give up our desire for this, change our lifestyle for this. If I wanted this car and now it's not the time for me to get this car, whatever it is, right? Very superficial, but whatever, right? Let us turn this land of Moriah and let us trust God, and eventually it will be the place or the situation where the Lord provides. So let us flip that and trust in God that that's what will happen. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Okay, so we're almost finished. So we'll read verse 15 to 19, please.
Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing I will bless you, multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt at Beersheba.
All right, so what we can see here is God starts to rain down blessings on Abraham. And this isn't because Abraham, was about to slay his son and he's become a very good man, right? It's not because of the act itself, okay? But rather, the act shows God Abraham is a perfect vessel that God can work through, right? So instead of Abraham, it's not like a reward system. It's not, I did this, I gave this much, I'm going to be rewarded for this much. It's the place of his heart, all right? His heart was ready to give, ready to do whatever God requested from him at any time, right? So God, because of that, is now able to work through Abraham, because he knows that whatever he gives Abraham, he's going to understand that this isn't mine. I didn't get this from anyone except from God. Whatever he does for Abraham, he's going to understand that I'm working for God. And if God requests for it back, what's Abraham going to do? Give it back straight away, right? Without any hesitation. Okay? So, for example, also I just wanted to add, if we look at verse 16, we see again God says, and have not withheld your son, your only son. So, whatever God asks us, even if it's very difficult, once again, he doesn't forget how hard it is. Okay? So, for example, if God wants to use me and I'm resisting, do you think it's possible for God to work through me? Or us, right? Let's speak about us. If God wants to use us and we resist, right? So if he says, I want you to do this, and we say no, we resist, is it possible for God to work through us? Hands up for yes. Okay, hands up for no. Okay, so I think personally it's very hard for God to work through us if we're resisting. If we're being resisting and we don't want to do something, I think God, it makes it difficult for him to work through us, right? So the example that I heard is, imagine there's a workman in a shop. He goes to use his tools, but his tools don't want to listen to him. So for example, if God has a hammer and a nail, if we have a hammer and a nail, or a workman has a hammer and a nail, and he wants to hammer this nail in, but then the hammer says, this isn't the right tool, use a different tool, and the hammer starts to resist, okay? The workman, whoever is using this hammer, is going to say, you stupid tool, right? I'm the operator of this tool, so this is how it works. This is the best way to do it, right? So that's the same thing, same concept with us. If God wants to use us, but we say, no, this isn't the way it should be done, it's better to be done this way, is that the right thought? I don't want to say we're stupid, but it could be very stupid. But it's difficult, right? It's not easy, okay? So wherever I have my will involved in this relationship with God, and where my will is paramount, I cannot be used by God and inherit the blessing. Wherever we submit our will to God, he can work through that, okay? So Abraham had a will, and his will would probably have been to have a son that is blessed, be blessed through his son, which was his promise that was given to him, and God asked him, flip it, offer to me Isaac, and simply he accepted, right? This is, because God tested Abraham to this point, and because Abraham proved that he was able to do what was unthinkable for God, now he's that perfect vessel for grace. So, and this is us. God can only use us when we don't fight him. When we give up and don't have a mind or will of our own, he can use us. So this is more of a keep it to yourself thing. Think of the one thing you want most in your life. All right, everyone thinking of it? Everyone thinking of the one thing they want most in their life? Now, imagine God asking you from it. So he asks you to give it to him. And so my question to you guys is it easy for us to sacrifice it to him? And I'm not saying that God's going to ask us for it. I'm not going to say God's going to tell you, give me this or don't give me this, right? But it's more like God will never ask you to give more than what you're able to bear, right? He will never do that to us, right? But to the capacity that we have and to the capacity that we listen is to the amount that God will able to give us grace, right? So as much as we're able to submit is as much as God's able to work through us. So like we said in the beginning, is to the capacity that you're able to lose everything is the capacity that you're able to gain everything. So if God asked us to give up our success or sacrifice all the dreams we had for the future, would we say thank you? If not, then we need to work just as Abraham did, getting to know God and knowing that whatever he asks from us, he gives us infinite fold. So just as Abraham did not hesitate to give all God asked for when he asked for it. So the final thing we're going to say today is what we read today has to have something or some meaning to us in our life. It's not just a historical event. Okay, it's not something that just happened in history. But there's a promise that if we flee to God, if we give everything up for him, if we run to him, we'll have strong consolation and blessings will follow. Does anyone have any questions so far or any comments? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I think it could. I guess my takeaway from it was more of God's blessing him because of the ability of sacrifice that he had, or the amount of, or like the ability, or the amount he was able to sacrifice for God was so much that God blessed him for it because he was perfect. Anyone else want to say anything or add anything? And that's the point, right? So Abraham understood that whatever he had wasn't of his own, and it was from God. So for him to give it back, it was just normal. Okay, if you want it back, have it back. It's not mine anyways. You know what I mean? So he understood this concept. Exactly right. So same thing for us in our lives, right? If God gives us something, we love it so much, and if it's time to give it back, it's life. Like for example, if someone passes away, God gave us this person. If it's their time to go, it's not up to us to, say no. It's God's will. So now we have verse 20 to 24, which is the family of Nahor. So we'll just quickly read this, but I have nothing to add to it. So can the next person read 20 to 24, please?
Now it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Indeed, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Huz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother Kamul, the father of Aram. Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begot Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubine, whose name was Rumah, and born Tebah, Gaham, Thahash, and I can't say that.
Okay, and glory be to God forevermore. All right, thanks, guys. Alrighty, guys. So for announcements today, we have a few announcements, which are Christian Aid every Tuesday. So that's every Tuesday at 6:50, Romore Community Centre in Minto. There will be food after. If you're not on the group chat where all the announcements are placed, please feel free to see anyone. You're more than welcome to be added. There's also the Instagram where everything's announced there. Youth is every Friday at 8 o'clock, and that's it. Can we please stand up for prayer? Thank you.